For those of you that have been following my work for some time, you probably know that at the beginning of each year, for many years now, I've started it with an exercise. And for more than a decade, the exercise was what I call my three words, which were simply three individual words that I came up with that were designed to really set the tone for the year and really be a guide or a theme for me to really focus on and to continue to go back and look at those words throughout the course of the year. Well, in the past 2 years, I've changed up the exercise, and this is the second year, 2026. This is the second year that I've done what I call my three polarities exercise, because what I realize is that a well-lived life isn't free of tension. It's really guided by how we hold it. And so over time, I've come to see these tensions not as problems to solve, but as polarities to navigate. And so just like we've got yin and yang, which have been around for thousands of years, polarities only make sense in relation to each other. And the work isn't about choosing one side or the other, but trying to figure out how can we hold both of these polarities or contradictions at the same time. So in today's podcast, I want to discuss how well I executed on my three polarities from 2025. And then I'm going to reveal what my polarities are here for 2026. So let's dig in with 2025 and take a review of that. So here's my take on how the polarities from last year really shaped my behavior. And the first polarity that I had last year was what I called Horizon Hearth. And this is a polarity that really tries to hold a tension between what I called expansive ambition and grounded presence. And so Horizon was calling me to look outward, to try and pursue reinvention and adventure at the stage of life that I'm at right now. So it really was this sort of a pull of uncharted waters. And there was a persistent question in there, which was, what's next? Now, by contrast, Hearth centered me in home and love and daily rituals. It really reminds me to try and tend to what's already beautiful in my life and what's already sustaining in my life. And so as I look back on 2025, Horizon called pretty loudly. And I really felt like I moved forward in that area. So particularly in sailing, again, some of you that follow me may know that I've picked up sailing here in the past 2 or 3 years. So in 2025, I went on some really cool trips, one of which was a 600-mile sailboat race in the Caribbean. And so I really leaned into this side of movement and exploration in 2025. Now, at the same time, Hearth mattered just as much as well. And so, fortunately, we spent a lot of what I would call unhurried time with our grown children and with their families. And we spent a lot of time celebrating meals and just simply enjoying each other's company. And that has been a deep source of joy and grounding. And it really provided a warm counterbalance to this pull of adventure. And what this polarity, I think, reinforced for me this past year is the importance of like answering the calls. So like, what was the call? What was asking to be explored? And so, we can't neglect either side of this, because if we, for any polarity, if we neglect one side of the polarity, then eventually it's going to show up as frustration. And that really wasn't a message that I wanted to model for the people that I love. And so living this polarity really allowed me to honor both and to show that a full life makes room for more than just one calling. And so as I look back on this one, I would say overall, I'm really very pleased with how this Horizon Hearth polarity played out in 2025. The second polarity that I had in place for last year was what I called slack flood. And apparently, I'm a bit of a slow learner on this one, because life keeps reminding me that it isn't meant to be one long, relentless push. And so progress really requires this rhythm of moments of intensity followed by intentional pause. And so slack was really trying to invite me to slow down, to reflect, to recharge. And it is a reminder that progress isn't always measured by checked boxes, by getting stuff done. Now, flood, on the other hand, is really about harnessing energy and moving decisively when momentum is happening. And of the three polarities that I had in 2025, I would say that slack flood was the hardest for me to integrate. And as I look back, I mean, you know, I've never really been particularly good at slacking, even when my body or the circumstances were clearly asking for it. And so, despite my best intentions to honor more slack last year, I ended up getting pneumonia. And then after that, I got vertigo. And both of those hit me pretty hard. And I can't say what really caused them, but I really can't ignore the role that stress or pace or lack of recovery can play in shaping my health. And so that was definitely an eye opener. And actually, this is the second year in a row where I've had a short term health setback. And I continue to do some homework and research and try and figure out what's behind this trend. Well, sure, I'm getting older. I understand that. But I've also come to see that illness is less about a random failure of the body and more about really this is feedback. This is the body trying to tell me that, hey, maybe you're pushing yourself beyond its ability to adapt. And so I had some long stretches of flooding, like a lot of travel, a lot of adventure stuff, a lot of physical effort, a lot of stimulation. And so all this flood without sufficient slack, I mean, that may not have been the direct cause, but they can certainly create the internal conditions where that resilience erodes and the recovery lacks. And so going forward, I think the lesson for me here is that not to avoid intensity, but to make sure that I intentionally pair it with restoration, and not just physical restoration. Obviously, that's important, but I also want to make sure that I'm in a mental state that's conducive to restoration and to healing and to keeping the energy in my body alive and flowing. All right, so that was the first one there. Also, I went back in 2023. So one of my three words in 2023 was the word sense, and I think that also applies here as well. And so I want to quote something that I wrote back in 2023 when I was talking about the three words here. And so I talked about how through interoception, the brain is able to sense the internal state of the body, both at a conscious and unconscious level. And when you get better at sensing your body's internal state, you get an early warning indicator when something's not quite right. And that's the end of that quote there. And so I think the takeaway here is that I need to be even more interoceptive, and I need to pay more attention to the signals that my body is sending me. And I have to understand that this is it's not noise. It's insight that needs to be processed. On a positive side here, I think one of the unexpected gifts of this polarity was shedding the guilt that I often feel on days when I don't, quote, produce in the way that I think I should. And so when I was putting this together, writing this blog post, I was actually sitting in my parents' living room back in Omaha. And my mom is 91. My dad is 96. They're still living independently. And so as I spend time with them and I watch them, it really reminds me that health, it's shaped by so many different things. There's genetics, there's relationships, there's how you're taking care of yourself, and yes, I think there's a lot of luck in there as well. And so if I miss a workout or if I choose to rest, I need to make sure that I'm not thinking that that's failure or that I'm slacking. It's really wisdom. And when I stay too long on one side of these polarities, what happens is the downside eventually makes that correction for me. And so too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing when it comes to these polarities is how I'm thinking about that. The other gift I think here was learning to find slack inside of a flood period. And that connection really occurred during some of our sailing trips this past year, where my wife and I really began to savor what we called slow mornings. And so these were times where we're sitting at anchor and we just really, really enjoyed the simplicity of drinking coffee, of making breakfast, of sitting out in the cockpit and seeing and hearing the sounds of nature waking up around us, and this, the gentle sway of the boat while watching the sun peek out above the horizon. It was those were the moments that really reinforced something important, which is that life doesn't have to be all on or all off. I mean, I know it's sounds pretty obvious, right? But things can be intermittent here, sort of like windshield wipers. So by keeping slack flood, by keeping that front and center, I've really learned to see slacking not as laziness, but as preparation. It's that space that allows for the next flood to arrive with energy and clarity and intention. Okay. So that was the first one. So let's talk about the second one in 2025, which was control flow. Now, I'm pretty much a planner by nature. And if I'm really being honest with myself, I would say that I can probably lean toward a control freak. And so this polarity really challenged me to find that sweet spot between structured action and letting life unfold. And so as I think about control, that was really trying to represent deliberate effort, representing planning and preparation and measurable outcomes. Now, flow, by contrast, really was about inviting me to loosen my grip, to really trust what's emerging there, and to work with life's natural currents rather than trying to fight against them. And so, what surprised me this past year was how differently this polarity showed up across some different domains that I was involved in. So, let's talk about work for a second here. So, in work, I really lean much more toward flow. And what I mean by that is instead of my usual emphasis on detailed business planning and really tracking everything, I sort of relaxed my grip a little bit and I focused more on doing the work in front of me. Now, I still paid attention to results, but it was without this familiar undercurrent of sort of a self imposed pressure and frustration when things didn't quite go exactly as planned. And with this sort of looser grip here, the outcome actually turned out pretty well. So 2025 ended up being one of my best years ever financially, and had a full roster of coaching clients and podcasting clients, and it was a great year. So it all worked out extremely well. And so, I've been working for 40 years now, and I would say that I have definitely moved a long way from my early days of rigid planning and tracking. And so today, I think I live somewhere between, let's say, hit the numbers and que sera, sera. So yes, I'm absolutely fully engaged. I'm informed. Attentive, but I would say I'm maybe a little less intense than I've been, but we still get the same good results. Okay. So by contrast, if I think about sailing and think about that domain, so on the water, I lean very heavily into control. Well, at least as much control as you can have when you're sailing, because you're sort of at the mercy of weather and other things as well. So but in terms of control, I tried to control all the things that I could control. So I really tried to prepare meticulously. I really, spending time practicing knots. I was visualizing docking and maneuvers. I was writing checklists. I was running through what could go wrong and what I could do. And then, of course, out on the water, practicing different things as well. And so, on the water, the stakes feel real and mistakes carry pretty serious consequences. So I felt like I really had to do all of that because the last thing I wanted to do was make some kind of preventable error and find myself making a mayday call, which certainly no sailor ever wants to do. And so, as a little aside here, during one of my trips, there was a particularly tricky point when I was at the helm, and a squall comes up, and so the skipper says to me, I'm trying to figure out what to do. Do I need to, go off the wind, go into the wind. What do I need to do here? And so the skipper's standing in the companionway and he says, Steve, you're overthinking it. Stop thinking and start feeling. And so while trying to, control things during sailing, it might work at times, but there are other times when you actually have to sort of feel your way through. And so that was another thing that I've really been working on, is not just understanding the technicalities of sailing, but also trying to understand the feeling parts and just trying to be more in tune with the whole environment when I'm out there on the water. So it's, for me personally, someone who tends to be a little more analytical. It's a great exercise, and I think it's really helping me grow in a number of different ways. So looking back here, I think the pattern makes sense. So in business, I've got decades of experience, and I think that really gives me the confidence to relax and adjust in real time. Whereas in sailing, I'm really still early in the learning curve, and I think the margin for error is smaller, and so I think control seemed to be the more responsible choice there. And so I think the lesson, if I want to think there's a lesson here, is that at least for me, when you're new, I got to be disciplined. And when you're experienced, I think you really sort of earn that right to loosen your grip. And there's an old saying that you have to know the rules before you break them, and I think that pretty much sums up the idea here. So I see experience. What it does, it really builds this quiet reservoir of confidence, and it's one that allows you to really trust yourself, to respond fluidly, and let the winds carry you forward without really losing your course. So all right, so that's sort of a recap here of the three polarities for 2025. So now let's take a look at 2026. What did I come up with for this year? So for 26, I chose some polarities that I think will help me stay aligned as I create, navigate, and write. And so these three that I decided on, they really remind me to honor the story I'm living, to hold a clear direction while I'm adapting to what unfolds, and then choose language that is both clear and compelling. And so rather than resolving these tensions, these polarities are going to help me live inside it. With that little setup, here are my three polarities for 2026. The first one is mythos method. And so, okay, what the heck is this? So mythos to me is it really speaks to story. It talks about symbolism and meaning, whereas method speaks to systems and process and discipline. So this polarity really reflects the relationship between the story that I'm living and the structures that make that story possible. And as I mentioned in my polarity post last year in the podcast I did on this last year, I'm really I'm drawn toward realizing dreams rather than just reading about other people's dreams. So for me, mythos, this isn't about ego or spectacle. It's not about, oh, look at Steve, what cool stuff he's doing. Rather, it's about meaning. It's about taking a dream and placing it into a personal narrative that gives my life texture and intention. And so what feels mythic to me, I mean, it might be something like, sailing around an island, which, to someone that has a lot more experience than I do sailing, that's a piece of cake. So myth it's relative. It's not shaped by comparison, but it's shaped by personal resonance. And so I'm not particularly interested in measuring my life against anyone else's. What I really care about is being able to go to bed at night, looking forward to getting up in the morning. And I think that by using story and narrative to place my life in context, it's going to help me stay awake to it, and it's going to help me live deliberately rather than sleepwalking through my days here. So, all right. So where does method fit into this here? So we got mythos, we've got method. What's method? So method is about providing the how to mythos's what and why. So it's basically it's helping me figure out, well, how do I turn this compelling story from just a mental fantasy into an actual lived experience? And so practice, preparation, repetition, those are the things that really form the unglamorous work that makes a meaningful life possible. And so mythos and method, they need each other. So mythos without method, I think just remains this imagined future, this fantasy out there. Whereas method without mythos just becomes mechanical and sterile. And so we really need both of those. And I've been on this planet for more than 60 years. And I find myself sort of naturally looking back and searching for the arc of my story. And yeah, I can see there are some clear chapters there. There's moments of growth, there's periods of struggle and despair, and certainly some unforeseen detours in there. And so the question that I wrestle with is, what's the through line? What is the story ultimately moving toward, and what will still matter after that last page is turned? And so, with luck, there's still a whole lot of story here to be written. And Mythos Method really serves as my reminder, not just to admire stories from a distance or admire other people's stories, but to consciously shape my own and live it with intention. Okay, Mythos Method, that's the first polarity here for 26. My second polarity is compass wind. And so think about sailing, and I know I got a lot of nautical themes in here, so hopefully doesn't bother you, but that's sort of where I'm at right now. So uh, when you're steering a sailboat, when a human is steering a sailboat, and it gets too tiring, there are a couple of common ways that you can steer the boat on a long passage. One, of course, is like an electronic autopilot. And the second is what they call wind vane self steering. And so with an electronic autopilot, you basically set a compass heading, let's say it's 270 degrees, and the boat then uses electricity to hold that course regardless of any wind shift that may happen. And so the instruction is very simple and fixed at 270 degrees. You're going to be sailing due west. Whereas a wind vane, it's a little bit different. So instead of steering to a compass heading, it steers to a wind angle. So basically, you might say something like you're going to set it to sail 90 degrees off the wind. And as the wind shifts, the boat is going to shift course as well to try and retain that 90-degree off the wind angle. And so the direction is going to adjust even though the intent remains the same. And to me, that contrast captures this polarity for me. So compass represents the direction I choose. Wind represents the forces I respond to along the way. And at the extremes, compass can harden into rigidity, like I'm going 270 degrees west, whether it kills me or not. And of course, rigidity, something I've been accused of more than once. And also wind, taken too far, it becomes drift. It becomes a loss of agency in the face of changing conditions. And so neither extreme leads anywhere good. Just like I said earlier, where, any one of these polarities, if you take them too far, it becomes a liability. And so as it relates to these, the real work here lies in discerning when to hold a heading and when to adjust. So when to stay committed to a plan and when new information or unexpected resistance is begging for some kind of course correction. So that's really the tension that I'm going to be holding here. And so that's really what's defining the polarity for me. And here in 2026, what I want to do with this polarity is I want to set a clear direction, while at the same time, I want to be responsive to what unfolds. I don't want to be so attached to some predetermined outcome that I miss the shifting wind, especially when it might carry me towards something better than I had originally imagined. So yeah, set a course, but also be open to serendipity and something happening that might actually be a better outcome for me. So that's the piece of discernment here with this particular polarity. The next polarity is precision poetry. So let's go back to February 2024. Up until that point, I had been writing a newsletter called GTK, which stands for Good to Know. I'd written that newsletter for many years and designed for an advisor audience. And so February 24 rolls around and life got super busy. And so I stopped the newsletter because I had a whole bunch of other stuff going on. So we were preparing to relocate across the country, and my schedule was full with coaching clients and podcasting and ROL advisor clients. And so I thought this was just going to be about a 1 month sabbatical from writing. Well, here we are, early 2026, and I still haven't restarted GTK. And I've done very little writing here in the past couple years. And so the pace never really slowed, and I never got back into the writing. But with precision poetry, I'm really basically committing that regardless of how busy things get, 2026 is the year that I'm really going to get back to writing, because I really miss this quiet discipline of writing. I miss the time of being alone with my thoughts. I really like putting in the effort of trying to figure out, well, what is it that I actually believe? And then finding the language that not only informs, but actually engages and activates the reader. And so this precision poetry polarity is really naming the tension that I want to live inside as I'm writing. And so, I care about saying things clearly. But I also care about saying them beautifully. And so I want my work, I want my writing to inform people without losing its capacity to transform people. Now, I'm probably not going to be writing poetry, but I want my writing to be shaped by a poetic sensibility. And so what, poetry does, poetic writing really says a lot using fewer words. And it takes a long time to write because it really demands attention, compression and restraint. And I know myself well enough to know that brevity has never been one of my natural strengths. In fact, an article that I wrote here recently for Think Advisor magazine, they edited my article. It was called "Why It Pays to Run Your Practice with a Human First Approach." So I sent them the article, and when it actually got published, they cut 25% of my words. And as hard as it was for me to admit, I think the piece was probably better because of the tighter editing. And so the poetic thinking here, the poetic sensibility, I think is going to help me try and you know make my writing a little denser, I guess you could say, in terms of say more with fewer words. And it also invites thought rather than instructions. And it evokes rather than explains. And it's really, I just want it to linger there after that pure information fades. So I don't want to be in the information business. I really want to be in the transformation business. And so contrasting that is clarity matters. I have points of view, I have insights, I have recommendations, and I don't want to lose my readers by getting self-indulgent and waxing poetically. And I don't want to make my readers have to work too hard to understand what it is that I'm trying to say. And so that's really the tension here. That's the work. I want to be clear enough to inform, and I want to be lyrical enough to transform. And so as I think about these three polarities here for 2026, I've come up with a little shorthand way of thinking about them and how can I distinguish these three over the course of the year. So the first one here that I mentioned, Mythos method, that to me is about living a meaningful story while building the habits and systems that bring that story to life. And then the second one, compass wind, that's really about setting a clear direction while adapting to changing conditions along the way. And then the third one, precision poetry, is about writing with clarity and accuracy while leaving room for language that moves and awakens you, the reader. And so, all right. So I hope you would do this exercise as well. So let me wrap up here for a moment with some practical tips on how you can actually come up with your own three polarities exercise. And so I'd say some keys here are to identify what your key tensions are. So reflect on some areas of your life where you're feeling pulled between two opposing but interdependent forces. Now, this is important that these are not just opposites of each other. These are two things that need each other, and they need each other at different times and in different ways. And so they're not just pure opposites, but they're interdependent. We've got to figure out when do we need to lean more into one and less into the other. And this isn't about balance either. This isn't about, well, I need 50% of this polarity and 50% of that one. It's really about the weaving, between the two, and where's the emphasis at any particular point in time. So that's really where a lot of this discerning comes into play. And so really spend some time thinking about what are the meaningful pairs that you're going to focus on. So then another thing is I like threes. I like things that come in threes. And so I encourage you to come up with three polarities that really resonate with you, that connect with your values in your current life stage. And then also try and ensure that each of these pairs, each of these polarities address a distinct aspect of your life. So it could be in relationships, it could be health, it could be work, it could be creativity, or whatever is important to you at this point in life. And then define each side. Make sure that each side is clearly articulating the polarity, what that polarity represents for you. And just think about what are the values and the behaviors that they inspire. What are the upside and the downside of each of these polarities if they're taken to extreme? Because as I've said before, you go too far in any one of these, it's going to lead to a negative, and that's when you go to the other one, which then turns into a positive. I also encourage you to track your progress. So, check in from time to time. You could use a journal or a weekly reflection to assess how well you're honoring both sides of the polarity. And then also, find a way to integrate this into your daily life. Find ways to regularly remind yourself of the polarities and try and apply them to some real life choices, whether that's work, home, or in personal growth. And also encourage you to just print them out or have them on your computer screen so that you can see them daily. So I've got just to the left of me, I've got my daily outcome sheet that I work up every day. And that is where I have my three polarities listed. I print it out. It's a Word doc. I print it out on my printer over here on the right. Maybe that's to your left. And so it sits on the top of my desk every day, and I look at it each day. So yeah, it stays front and center with me for sure. And so you come up with your three. I set it aside for a day or two. I take another look at it and just make sure that it still feels good. So really, take some time to figure these out and make sure that they're going to be a good resource for you for the year. And yeah, don't keep this idea secret. Would love for you to share it with your family and friends, even with your clients as well, and they may enjoy going through the exercise as well. I'd love to hear from you too. So if you want to complete this exercise, please feel free to reach out to me. And I think this is on YouTube as well. So you can make a comment on YouTube. And you can also go to my website, stevesandusky.com. And Sandusky is spelled with an I, not a Y. And you can easily contact me there. And so, yeah, so just keep in mind, I think if you really pay attention to these polarities, if you really use them as a good exercise and really play with the tension between the two, I think it can make some drastic improvements in your life. So with that, let's make 2026 a fantastic year, and I look forward to hearing from you.